Okay, so what I thought I'd do for this video is three things. First of all, we're going to do a little bit of an unboxing and I'll show you what's inside of here. Part two is my run through, how I set it up, what I would do when looking at the XS10 for the very first time, as far as menu, as far as customization, as far as getting it up and running and how I like to use it. Part three will be like my initial impressions, what I initially thought of this camera from opening it and using it for the first 10 minutes. We'll have a better review coming up in the future. Right, so let's rip into this and see what's inside. Instruction manual and some encouragement for using Capture One. After using Capture One, I'd actually really recommend diving into that if you're new to the Fujifilm system. If you're also new to editing, it can be a little bit tricky making that transition from Lightroom, but we digress. I'm never going to read that. Cardboard, camera. Pre-installed neck strap lugs. I'm really happy they've started doing that. We'll come back to this. More cardboard, more cardboard. USB to USB-C charge cable, but do note there is no wall socket adapter in here, so you're going to need to use your own charge cable. I wouldn't be surprised if it requires a 30-watt charger as well for full speed, just like the XT4. I don't know that for a fact, but check on your wall socket bit to see the wattage, the speeds, to get an idea of how fast you can charge your camera. USB-C to 3.5. This is to plug in the side of this so you can use headphones. Battery. This is going to be pretty flat straight out of the box, so you're going to have to give it a charge. And the standard, boring, non-exciting Fujifilm neck strap. It does the job. I actually use it great for wrapping around my wrist, but as the neck strap goes, I don't like it. Right, let's chuck the battery in here and fire this up. Alright, so first thing I'm going to do is very similar to when I set up any new camera for the first time. It's just my usual preference stuff. So instantly I notice there's no Q button. It's on the top now, so hit the Q button, go down to the bottom right hand corner, screen brightness +2. I do that every single time. I find it's the nice mix between screen brightness and like ease of visibility when out in the sun and battery life, so we'll leave that there. Right, into the menu and let's go for a bit of a scroll. Long exposure, noise reduction off. If you're skilled enough to do long exposures, you can skilled enough to do noise reduction later on in editing. If you leave this turned on, every time you take a long exposure shot, it will take a second photo straight after your first one for the exact same amount of time. So as an example, if you take a 30-second photo, it will take another 30-second photo that is just black, combine them together and try and reduce the noise. Like I said, turn it off. If you're skilled enough to do long exposures photography, you're skilled enough to do long exposure noise reduction in editing later on. Color space, sRGB or Adobe RGB. My personal preference is Adobe RGB. There are more colors to it. However, if you don't convert your images correctly when putting them on social media and websites, you may get not as accurate results, but I'm always going to go Adobe RGB. Down to the AF/FM menu on tab 2, focus mode. I prefer a single point. Now this is a lot of different options depending on if you want like it automatically to select and track, or if you just want to go for a single center point. Whatever your preference is, I'm going single point. Page 3 of the AF/FM tab is the touchscreen. I personally hate touchscreens, especially with an eyepiece. It's a real pain in the butt when you bring it up to your eye and your nose touches the screen and changes your focus point. Just my preference. You can leave it on if you want, but I am definitely turning that off. I don't want to select the area. I don't want to take the shot. I don't want touchscreen to do anything. It's just not for me. So touchscreen off. Right, under the shooting settings on page 1, there is the save self timer option. You can turn this on or off, and what it does is if you say set your self timer to 2 seconds or 10 seconds and then turn your camera off and then back on again, it'll remember how you had your self timer set. If you have this save self timer turned off, it will just always reset it back to not being on your self timer every time you turn your camera off and on again. So I'm going to turn it on because I like my self timer being saved, because I do a lot of landscape photography and I like to say turn it off, walk 5 minutes, turn it back on and have that self timer saved. So I'm going to turn it on, but you might want to leave it off. Actually, you know what? I think I'm about to see a bit more if I chuck a lens on this. Alright, spanner, user settings, my menu settings. So under the My Menu settings, you'll see there are two options. There's one for the stills mode and there's one for video mode. What this will do, as soon as you start going through this and adding items to it, is it will unlock the bottom tab that's kind of visible at the moment. So if we go into the still one at the moment, we go add an item and we will go for tone curve, because I'm constantly tweaking that. If we hit that, go OK to save, now you'll see down the bottom there is the My Menu tab, which we still can't access. Oh, it's because we haven't saved it. Now if we go back, Done. Now, if we jump out of this menu screen, push the menu button, it will automatically come to the My Menu tab, and you'll see tone curve there. So what's awesome about this is just about every single setting in the whole entire camera that you want to tweak, if you add it to the My Menu tab, it will be the first thing that comes up in that My Menu option when you push the menu button. Awesome to get to those little extra things you like to change that you don't want to assign to an FN button or a Q button. And same thing for in video mode, 2 different My Menu options depending on if you're in photo or video. Awesome, I love that feature. So in the setup menu underneath the spanner and on screen setup menu, and then if you scroll down to page 2, I think it is, there is preview exposure and white balance in manual mode. This is a real big one to play with. I think by default it is on to preview exposure white balance like it is turned on, and I would probably recommend leaving it there. However, if you are using a flash a lot, say you're shooting in a real dark studio or dark environment, if you turn this off, your eyepiece and your screen will brighten up significantly, so you can still see what you're pointing your camera at, even if you've got your shutter, your aperture and your ISO dialed right down to be more suited for when your flash fires. So if you leave it on, what you see, what you get through the eyepiece and through the screen. If you turn it off, you'll just see the clearest, brightest possible, or the most accurate image possible, but not necessarily what your settings are going to result in your image showing you. It's very great for if you're using a flash or in studio a lot, but most of the time, most people, you want to leave the preview, the exposure and the white balance on. If you just do preview white balance, it'll show you what the colors will look like, but not what your exposure is going to look like. So leave it on if you want, but if you're doing studio work, if you're using a lot of flash, maybe turn that off. Image display. Now my personal preference here is always to set this to continuous. What I like to happen is after I take a shot, my photo stays previewed on the back of my screen until I press any other button. If you like, you can have that preview only show up for 1.5 or half a second or not at all, but my preference is continuous, to leave it there until I'm ready to take another shot. Once again on the setup menu under screen settings and down to page 2 is the F-Log View Assist. This is once again for video, but if you turn this on, this will show you kind of like what your film simulation, what a LUT would look like on your F-Log. So F-Log for video settings is it's a far less contrast, a lot grayer looking image, and it can be a little harder to get your exposure correctly when your image looks so grey on the back of the screen. So if you turn this on, it will show you a far more contrasty looking image, but it's not going to change your F-Log. It's still going to be that normal, flat, high dynamic range looking video file, if that's what you want. Once again, the spanner, screen setup, page 3, display custom settings. So this is a big one. So I like electronic level turned on. I'm always going to have that on. Histograms I want on. View highlight alert. Shooting mode, I don't care about. Aperture, speed, ISO, I want to see that. Information background, no. Focus mode, no. Photometry, no. Shutter type, no. Flash, no. So what I'm doing here is I'm cleaning up far more off my display. I don't like too much information up on my screen. I like it quite clean and simple, so at a quick glance I can see what settings matter to me. And in here, through that screen and through the eyepiece, you can choose what is shown to you. So you don't have to do exactly the same as me, but I like a lot of these things turned off, like a lot turned off. Done. So that's a few things turned on, most turned off, and hopefully that'll suit me perfectly. Once again, the setup menu, which looks like a spanner, down to button and dial settings, and on the first page here you'll see edit quick save menu. Actually, one thing I forgot to mention, sorry, is if you press and hold the Q button, you can quickly get into editing that Q button menu. As you can see down the bottom right hand corner, it says long press the Q button to edit it, which is a far quicker way of getting to editing that menu instead of going for that deep dive menu option like I just showed you. So press the Q button to open it up, then hold it down to quickly change it. Way better, way quicker, love it, good little change. So this Q button on the top, what these two options here are changing is what will be shown on your screen when you press that. So say if I go back into photo mode and have 12, 8 or 4 slots available. I'm going to leave it at the 12, but there are some things in here I don't hardly ever change. First of all, the face and eye detection, I don't want that on there. I like to reprogram that to a front button, which there isn't one of, so maybe I will leave it on. Flash functionality, okay, that I'm never going to change. Let's have a fiddle in here. Manual focus assist. As a landscape photographer, that's my personal preference. We're definitely going to turn that on. And now if we go OK to set, we'll jump out of here, we'll push the Q button on top. Now that bottom right option is whatever comes up when I'm doing manual focus, as my personal preference. So you can change that to be whatever you'd like, but this is a great way to really customize this. This will be a really interesting one. So under the spanner tab, once again, button and dial settings, and down to the FN function settings, I'm wondering how many FN buttons are going to come up. One thing that I kind of glossed over in the first initial impressions of this was the way this can still be reprogrammed. See, out of the box, the X-S10 works quite differently from all the other Fujifilm range, but if you're coming from another brand, I'm pretty sure you'd pick this up and run quite easily. But where it is different is the Q button and say the FN buttons. Well, there's not as many FN buttons, and when you press the Q button, it loads up a very different menu. And there are only 6 FN buttons, one of which is the Q button, which I wouldn't reprogram. I'd leave that as the Q button because it's great to get to. But if you want this top wheel here, you can still change to anything you like. For example, ISO. So you could have ISO there, you could have your shutter speed there, you could have aperture on the lens or on the front wheel there, and still use it very much like any other Fujifilm camera we've used before. But like I said, if you're coming from another brand, having that normal PASM dial and be able to just pick it up and run very similar to other brands makes a real nice transition camera. I say there are only 6 FN buttons that can be reprogrammed, one of which is the Q button, but if you turn your touchscreen on, there is also the 4 different screen corner edge shortcuts which you can reprogram as well. So you could say there are really 10, but if you turn the touchscreen off, there's only 6, and if you want to leave the Q button as the Q button, there's only 5. So it does limit it a bit, but it still can be very much programmed and suited just the way you like. So another thing I've noticed on the rest of the XT cameras, there is an option down here, a little dial you can switch to change over to manual focus or continual shutter speed. But that's not an option here. What I'm not liking is this button up here by the eyepiece being white balance. So if we change that, hopefully we can change that to manual focus, continual focus, single point focusing. So setup, button and dial settings, FN buttons. Let's go down to that eyepiece there and change it to focus mode. Focus mode, right, so now, hopefully when I push this button, I can go manual focus. Okay, cool, and then switch it back to continuous. Not to single? Not in video mode, right. So now if I switch over to a still mode, does it still do the same thing? It does, and I've got single option back. One thing that I was initially worried about would be missing was normally when you push the Q button up in the top left hand corner, there are custom modes you can switch through. At the moment it just says P because that's what mode I'm in, and if I go around to S and push Q, it changes to S, and I can't change any dial to change anything in there. And normally, like I said, you can cycle through that and go to different custom modes to have different film presets loaded in different settings depending on what you like to quickly change to. And I was like, that's missing, what am I going to do here? But then up on the top, once again on this big mode dial, is 4 different custom options you can change to, which is awesome. So I can have different film presets loaded up on custom 1, custom 2, custom 3 and custom 4 if I like to quickly change to. Combine that with still being able to change FN buttons plus the My Menu shortcut. I think is really cool to be able to get in and really dial in certain looks if you like. I think this could still be a very customizable and speedy way of using a camera. Right, let's flick over to video mode and see what options we can customize through there. So menu, shooting mode, I'm gonna go full manual, movie mode, 4K 16, 24 frames per second, 200 megabits per second, file format, no 265, which I can on movie though. Full high speed sync, so this is how you get into your 120 and your 240 frames per second. It is really impressive. This, just like the XT4 does have the 240 and the 120 frames per second. 120 is not so impressive, but 240 very much is. And over here is what you can set your base recording file format to be suited to. So because I'm shooting 4K 24 frames per second, I also want to do my slow motion as the base frame rate of 24 frames per second, and it would also magnifies by 10 really nicely. So that's 10 times slower if I turn on that full HD recording, but for now I'm going to turn it off. But that's how you get to it if you're new to the system. F-log recording is just a switch option. That's different. Movie settings page 3, there is an option for optimized movie controlled. So unlike the XT4 where I can turn off and disable all my settings, turning this on will only disable, from the looks of it, just this aperture ring on my lens. And I assume that's going to change it to one of these dials in the back here. So one's going to be shutter, one's going to be aperture. What's nice about that is if I change that for photos and then I switch over to video settings are left exactly how I had them, I'm guessing. Not a biggie actually. On the XT4 that was a major option on here. I'm not too worried about it. It really doesn't have too much of an effect other than turn it off or on. Like shifting that from optimized movie control, shift aperture from there to there. Who cares? So not quite as many buttons to change with, but definitely a far more different, more traditional way of operation to suit it. Well, not traditional, how would you describe that? For a lot of DSLR shooters, for a lot of people that haven't used Fuji before, and when they pick it up and go, I don't know how to operate this, this definitely feels very, very comfortable like all other brands. IBIS isn't quite as good, only 1 memory card slot, not weather sealed, no 4K 60, no 265. But is that it? Like, it still feels really good. Like, I love that grip in the hand, and it's nowhere near as physically big as I was expecting. Oddly enough, as quite an established Fuji shooter, going back to the PASM mode dial on the top actually feels slower. Maybe it's just because I haven't been using it for a while, in a work sense, but it still could be really, really quick. The camera menu options, like the Q button, etc., are set up very differently from the rest of the Fujifilm range out of the box, which I think is a bit interesting. But because it's so customizable, if you're very, very established in Fuji, but like the mode dial, you can still set those Q menus and your My Menu options up to suit exactly how you've been using Fujifilm options, if you're wondering about this as an upgrade. And it really is an upgrade for a lot of options. That physical size, I'm bringing this up a lot, but the weight is really nice, and that bigger grip, I do love. If it was weather sealed, it would have been done. What are the ports? C, HDMI. Oh, there is a microphone port at the top. Thank goodness for that. Battery door is quite far away from the tripod plate area, so you can have your tripod plate on and still open up your battery door. The viewfinder is definitely noticeably smaller than the XT4. Okay, XT4 functions and features are really starting to, I see why it's worth that extra step up. This is nearly all there. Nearly for that vlogging sense, I think that's actually quite practical. And it's got that extra switch mode. And the S in XS10 actually stands for simple. This is a very simple traditional way of operating. I keep saying traditional, but I mean it more in like a traditional digital SLR, not traditional film. Fuji X-S10 and a lot of the other cameras with the normal shutter dials on top, that's what I'd call a traditional way of operating. Well, this is more like a modern traditional way of operating. I'm going to be honest, I'm excited to use it. If you have any questions about this camera, anything you'd like to know, I've got this for another week or two, and next week will be my initial review of this camera. So if you have questions, let me know down in the comments below, and I'll try and answer them all for you next week, plus give you my thoughts on getting out in the field and using this. So out of the box, I'm excited. It actually feels good, and I know it's still going to have all that Fuji quality and customization. I really just need to have more of a play with it to give my final verdict. It's scarily close to an XT4, like especially for nearly half the price. As I said though, if you've got questions, let me know. If you could like, share, and please subscribe, it would mean the world to me, guys. But otherwise, until next time, I'll catch you next time.